Hey, Jimmy Murphy, Pierre McGuire here for another edition of the Eye Test on the Sick Podcast Network.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. The Eye Test with Pierre McGuire and Jimmy Murphy.
The Stanley Cup winning Colorado Avalanche. And after 22 years, Raymond Mark!
The sickest NHL podcast. It's gonna be sick.
Hey, welcome back to another edition of the Eye Test. Pierre McGuire, Jimmy Murphy here. And Pierre, watching all those games last night in the NHL, some really great ones, by the way. I mean, San Jose, wow. What about that? What is going on?
Comeback kids. They're amazing.
Know, huh? Unreal. Good for them. Good for them after the start they had. But, I mean, speaking of kids, Pierre, watching around the NHL and looking at these games and some of the performances from the younger players in this league right now, I think as you and I were talking earlier today, you need to let them develop. You need to have patience with these kids, and it will come. And we're seeing that with the likes of, a Quentin Byfield for the LA Kings, or JJ Peterka with Buffalo, or even Yuri Slafkovsky with the Montreal Canadiens now, starting to feel it, starting to come into fruition there. Pierre, talk to me about how important it is as a team, management, coaching staff, and even teammates to have patience with these kids.
Well, the most important thing is you got to turn out the outside noise. You cannot pay attention to what the pundits are writing or saying on talk radio. You can't pay attention to all these so-called insiders that know everything about everything, where they wouldn't know anything about anything unless people were leaking to them. The truth is that player development takes some time. And the most important thing, and you just mentioned three great names, but the one that I think is really important to talk about right now, because they're on this amazing roll, 11 straight wins on the road, the LA Kings, Jimmy. I mean, when you think about it, you look at them and the way they're able to go on the road. Now, they weren't letter perfect in Columbus the other night, but they found a way to come from behind. They were down 3-0. They still find a way to win in overtime. You see the way Anze Kopitar is responding. You see the way Drew Doughty is responding. But again, these are guys with winning pedigree. So what do you do if you're Todd McClellan on the LA Kings? You develop Quentin Byfield internally. You make players better at the NHL level. It's really important to do that now, Jimmy. A lot of teams don't do it. LA's one that deserves a lot of credit. They are doing it. If you watch Quentin Byfield's goal last night, his first goal of the game, when he goes around Caden Gooley, and Caden Gooley's a heck of a player, that's a power forward. That's not a small guy moving that fast. That is a power forward. Those guys are worth their weight in gold. LA deserves a lot of credit on him. Buffalo deserves a lot of credit on JJ Peterka. And Montreal's really starting to feel it now with Yuri Slafkovsky. So really good news for those three teams in particular.
Let me ask you too, Pierre. We're bringing up some big players here, power forward style. Is it harder to develop that type of player when they're that big and they're expected to come in and be this menacing presence out there? It feels to me from the outside sometimes like maybe there's more pressure on these guys because of their size, and yet you got to remember their age. They may be big physically, but mentally and getting used to the pro game, they're not there yet. Is it more important to take a little more patience with the big guys?
It really is. So I'll give you two examples close to your backyard. Mm-hmm. One benefited the Boston Bruins, one hurt the Boston Bruins. So you think about the trading of Joe Thornton to San Jose. That's not to disparage the players that came the other way. Primo was a good player. Stewart was a good player. Marco Sturm was a good player. They were good players, Jimmy. But not one of them was better than Joe Thornton, at least didn't have the potential to be as good as Joe Thornton. Mm-hmm. And eventually Joseph proved that. So that's one that hurt the Boston Bruins. Let's talk about one that helped the Boston Bruins. You think about Cam Neely coming over from Vancouver for Barry Peterson. Okay, I had the privilege of coaching Barry in Pittsburgh near the end of his career. Tremendous person, does a great job when he works on the Bruins telecast. He's a really good guy. But do you think he was better than Cam Neely long term? So Boston got frustrated with the big Joe Thornton. They traded him away. Vancouver got frustrated with the big Cam Neely. They traded him away. Is there more of a prototypical Bruin than Cam Neely?
No.
You know, when you think about it? Yeah. So that was a player they never drafted. It just shows you got to be patient developing these players, but in particular, big guys, Big guys take longer. Listen, I had Christopher Pronger when he was 19 years old.
Yep.
If you go look at the numbers, his first 5 years in the league, his best year was his first year. And it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with him. I got fired. It had to do, I think, a lot with Brad McCrimmon, by the way, the late Brad McCrimmon, who was his partner and his roommate. But I'm just telling you. And then you look at it, and eventually what happens? One of the great defenders over the last 30 years in the NHL, big guy, right, Jimmy? Big, 6'6", he gets traded.
Yep.
Think about it. I mean, you can't give up on these guys.
I'm with you. Another thing too, Pierre, you bring up Joe Thornton, and that kind of leads me. I know we didn't plan on talking about this, but I mean, I think it needs to be said too, is sometimes, and I thought this was the case with Thornton, sometimes you get a big player who maybe isn't the power forward you want, but you look at a Joe Thornton. I mean, Joe Thornton to me was a big version of Adam Oates. That I had just started watching Adam Oates as a kid and up through high school. And then I ended up covering Joe and his years here in Boston. And everyone wanted Joe to be Cam Neely, but he wasn't. Joe Thornton's Joe Thornton. He is what he is. And he turned out to be one of the greatest playmakers in the history of the game. So how do you, I guess the word, how do you fight the typecast or the sort of the stereotype for a player when he's that big?
One of the most important things when you're managing a team and a player like that, you talk about the outside noise. You got to put the ear muffles on so you don't hear anything. But this is really important. You have to have open communication with your coaches, but the coaches are on the front line. They get frustrated with the player, and eventually they say, I throw my hands up. I can't do anything more with this player. And that's when you have to say, okay, to the coach or the coaching staff, let's go out for dinner. Let's talk about the good things that he's done. Because more times than not always, I can speak to it because I've done it. More times than not, coaches focus on the negative part of the player's game rather than the positive part. And so I think it's really important when you're a manager in that situation, you focus on the positive part of the player's game and the fact that you say to the coach, we've entrusted you with this player because we think you can help fix him. We think you can help make him better. So you stress the positive stuff. More times than not, a lot of these players get traded out of certain environments because the coaches can't take it anymore. They go to the manager and say, I can't do it. He's not helping us. And then the manager will capitulate to the coach and trade the player. And that's the wrong way to do it. And I can tell you from personal experience, one of the best guys I've ever seen manipulate these kinds of situations, Craig Patrick in Pittsburgh. He was phenomenal in dealing with his staff and dealing with his players. He was off the charts good.
Nice. And Pierre, I want to segue a bit and kind of put this towards our guest today, who I'm really excited about.
Me too.
University of Minnesota head coach Bob Motzko will be joining us shortly. And of course, Bob, as you pointed out to me earlier today, I totally forgot. He was a head coach of the USA team that won gold at the World Juniors in Montreal. And it was so funny that you brought that up because a couple of weeks back, and I'm going to bring this up with Bob as well, but a couple of weeks back, we're talking to Charlie McAvoy, and people are starting to talk about the World Juniors that's coming on soon. And, just as he did when he came to Boston, because I remember having a conversation with him because that was an amazing moment for USA Hockey. I mean, I'm talking all levels of USA Hockey to go into the belly of the beast and win at the Bell Center, win that shootout. I mean, it was unreal. But, you could see when McAvoy got to the NHL that he just embraced the spotlight. He embraced the moment, and he loved big games. And that has continued throughout his career. And he continues to credit that to that moment in Montreal. So, Pierre, with the World Juniors coming up, we really haven't gotten a chance to talk much about it. And I'm sure we'll go more into rosters a bit next week. But just talk about, what moments like that can do, whether it's Charlie McAvoy for USA or whether it's any of the Canadian players. There's been plenty of them who have won gold. What does that moment do to build the strength of them internally?
So much. I can talk about Marc-Andre Fleury at the 03 World Junior in Halifax, where he was phenomenal. It was his draft year, and he did things that were just mind-shattering and eventually led to him being first overall. So the World Junior propelled him to that level. I can think to the next year, watching the Americans for the first time ever in 04 in Helsinki, Finland, winning against Marc-Andre Fleury in goal, a Canadian team that was a dream team. of great players: Ryan Getzlaff, Jeff Carter, Colburn, Braden Colburn on the. I mean, it was a murderer's row of players. Mike Richards, and Canada lost to the Americans. And one of the things that stood out was the play of Zach Parise and the leadership of Mike Eaves behind the bench with John Hines and Ryan Suter on defense. I mean, you look at all these things, and so eventually it propels those players and those coaches onto greater environments as well. Yeah. I think back to a 16-year-old Alexander Ovechkin in Halifax winning a gold medal. I think about watching the 05 World Junior and a guy by the name of Patrice Bergeron, even though he'd already been drafted, playing on a line with Corey Perry and Sidney Crosby. And I remember watching practice one day. Kevin Lowe was there. Wayne Gretzky was there. My partner, Gordon Miller, was there. I was there. And maybe Bob Nicholson, I think, from Hockey Canada at the time was there, now the president of the Edmonton Oilers. And we were watching. And you know what? Gretzky said something Wayne said something that was really smart. He says, I'm watching these guys and they move the puck. It's on a string. But he says, this 87, this Crosby, it's his work habits. His work habits were so exceptional. So you're watching this at the World Junior, playing with Bergeron and, Corey Perry, two pretty good players. And then you see what happens in 05. Sid, the lottery gets won by Pittsburgh, and he changes the entire complexion of not only an organization, but a city. He changed the whole perception of how
Pittsburgh. Could argue a league.
You know what? Really. Yeah. So the World Junior is a launching pad for so many players and coaches, Jimmy. And I got to tell you, I've been around the tournament since 1989. And, back then in 89, the Russians had Mogilny, Fedorov, and Bure as a line. The Czech Republic had Jaromir Jagr, Robert Reichel, and Bobby Olik as a line. Yeah, I mean, you start looking at these combinations, Jimmy, and you say, oh, my goodness, this is crazy how good this tournament is. Yeah. It's a must-watch if you're a hockey aficionado. And for Bob Motzko to be a head coach of a gold medal-winning team on foreign soil in the Bell Center in Montreal in 2017, I watched that and I was like, wow, what an amazing moment for him and for that team.
Yeah, it was something. And I mean, McAvoy, like I said, he still raves about it. Every time anyone asks him, why is it you can come up big in overtime or in a playoff game? He just, boom, right back to that game. He talks about it. And, I wanted to play a clip. I got it in too late to the producers, but I mean, he said it right then too. The other thing too, all these guys go on to play for different teams. But as you hear Stanley Cup champions say as well, I thought one thing he said that really stood out to me is we're brothers forever. Yeah. And we're brothers forever. And there's that bond there no matter what from those kids, even though they're only together for, say, a month at most. I mean, a lot of them are together in a lot of the USA camps and programs, obviously. But just from that month that they're together preparing and then playing in that tournament, there's always that bond.
Jimmy, it's amazing. The late, great Fred Sherrill had the best line of all. He said, win today, we walk together forever. And he wasn't wrong with his Philadelphia Flyer teams. And you look at the bond of those Flyer players. It's pretty amazing going back to those teams in the early 70s and the things they accomplished as a group. And Fred was right. He was spot on. And I think Coach Motzko would probably say the same thing. Jimmy, just think about some of the players that were on that roster. Troy Terry, Tage Thompson, Charlie McAvoy, Adam Fox, Ryan Lindgren, Jake Ottinger, Clayton Keller, Jordan Greenway, Joseph Wall, Jack Roslovic, Luke Cunnin. I mean, that's just some of them. Again, going off the top of my head. Yeah. That's a crazy roster of players.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. It's funny. I remember too, you remember when Bergeron took that hit from Randy Jones back in 2007, right?
Whatever.
He goes down. We don't know if his career is over, and he was out for the rest of the season. It was horrible. But he said, I think like the second player, and this was including his own teammates at the time, the second player to check on him was Sidney Crosby. Well, and that's from that bond 2 years before, right? I mean, that's from that friendship and that respect that they formed amongst each other in that tournament.
I'm not surprised. Well, I can just tell you the way those guys interacted in that tournament was phenomenal. Patrice, as you probably know him as well, or better than anybody covering the Boston Bruins over the last 15 to 20 years. Yeah. There are very few players I can say are better people than players. Yeah. He definitely is one of those guys, and he's obviously a magnificent, exquisite player. I would compare him, for those of us that are a little bit older, to Jean Rattel. He's the modern day version of Jean Rattel. And you talk to anybody that was around the National Hockey League, whether they were a Ranger fan or a Boston Bruin fan, where Jean Rattel played in both cities, they'll tell you no greater gentleman. And I would say Patrice Bergeron is much the same.
Russ Conway used to say the same thing. Great minds think alike. Well, listen, we are joined by another great hockey mind right now. He's coming on from, are they in Ohio State?
Yes, Ohio State in Columbus.
Ohio State in the University of Minnesota head coach Bob Motzko, and the head coach of that team we were just talking about in 2017 for the World Juniors, joining us here on the Eye Test of the Sick Podcast Network. I think we've got him. I'm going to loop him in. He's saying he's in the backstage there. Well, we'll loop him in a second. Little technical difficulties, but we'll get him on. And another thing I want to talk to Bob about too, Pierre, when we get him in, is you mentioned how it's a launching pad for coaches too. I think that's a great thing to ask him about too, because it must do the same or have the same effect that it does for the players when you're coaching in situations like that. So that's something we should bring up. I think we have Bob now here. Bob, you there?
Yes.
There we go. Hey, Bob, how are you?
All right. Good to be
Welcome
with you.
Welcome aboard the Eye Test with Pierre and I here.
Hi, Pierre.
Hey, Coach, how are you?
We're doing well.
You are doing well. You're doing very well. Excited to have
Columbus?
you on.
Sitting in Columbus, Ohio, getting ready to go this weekend.
Nice. Always a fun match up there, I bet. Pierre, you want to start her off?
Well, Coach, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on with us. I've watched your work and watched you play when I was coaching at Babson and you were at St. Cloud State, so I kind of know where you're coming from and all the work you've done. Let me ask you about the World Junior first and foremost, because it's that time of the year, and I know we've got a lot of Big Ten stuff going on. What was the feeling like? I know at the World Junior, one of the things you want to do is hear your anthem played on foreign soil. That means you either won gold or you won bronze. What was it like that night at the Bell Center for you when you heard the American national anthem after winning the shootout against Canada?
Well, first, you want to hear it anywhere you're at, just not on foreign soil. And but it happened to be in Ontario and Montreal. We moved over to the gold medal games over there, and it was incredible. The atmosphere, because we know how outstanding the Canadians, the passion they have for the sport, especially that tournament and that team, and. It was a sea of red and black, and you could just see the parents and a handful of very few other U.S. jerseys in the crowd that night. But it was a great game. It was a crazy game, but the talent was on display. We make the comeback, and then the thing goes into overtime, and then thank goodness for Troy Terry. He's the hero of the tournament with many other guys, but. It was an amazing feeling, but you have such a bond with those players. You're together for, almost a month, counting over a month, counting the summer, and terrific young men, great staff, and to be on that stage was definitely a highlight of my career, something I'll always cherish.
Jimmy, I have to tell you, Canada went up 2-0. Canada went up 4-2. U.S. found a way to tie it at 2. They found a way to tie it at 4. Colin White got the tying goal, a player that I worked with up in Ottawa. He's now part of the Pittsburgh Penguin organization. But, Coach, I just want to ask you, too many men on the ice in overtime. What are you thinking as the coach? You're in Canada now and you're saying, oh, my goodness gracious, what am I going to do now?
It's a players' tournament. That's one. It's one thing that I learned. You turn it over, you put it in the hands of the players. But yes, we had too many men on the ice, and the emotions were running, and you're just the first feeling you come is, oh, we're not going to lose this game because of this. Right. And Parsons was outstanding in goal. Yep. They had their chances, but our guys gutted it out and got us through the kill. And it was a crazy overtime, and the whole game was crazy.
I got a quick story, guys, just about that game. We'll go on. So I was actually in Montreal, but not at the game. And my friend owns a pub up the street from the Bell Center called McLean's Pub on Peel Street. Pierre knows where it is. And, I think it was right at the end of the third period. I asked my friend who owns, I said, hey, listen, I got to go in your office and watch the rest of this because I don't want to be around I'm the only American probably in the whole pub, and I don't want to be around them win or lose right now. And I fear for my safety a little. So he said, no problem. So I'm in his office, and then you guys won it, and I'm screaming up and down. But it was great. Nobody could hear me, and I enjoyed it by myself. It was perfect.
Coach, now I'm going to go to the other side of it. You've done such an amazing job since you stepped in at the University of Minnesota. Last year, we were this close to winning a national championship. And you lose, obviously, to a Quinnipiac team in overtime. Jacob Quillen with the overtime winning goal. You've had so many players from that team move on. Jackson Lacombe, Logan Cooley, Brock Faber, Ryan Johnson, Matthew Nyes. And then I look at your team this year. You haven't missed a beat. How have you managed that?
We have missed a little bit of a beat, but you can't help the impact that those players had in our program in what they did for us, and for us, to watch what they're doing now. But Lacombe stays through his senior year, Ryan Johnson through his senior year, and Faber through his junior year, and of course the two young guys, they're all doing great in the NHL, and they're going to be fun to watch. But we're handing over critical minutes now to new players, and that's the beauty of college hockey and college sports in general, is out with the old, in with the new. And we've got to, the last month and a half we're playing much stronger. We were playing 6 freshmen and sophomore defensemen who were taking the load of this. Chesley Thomas and Middlestat with Renzel and Mikey Kester, and those are names that we're going to hear about too in the future.
Yes, we are.
Their turn, and that's what we go through in college, is the passing the baton to the next group of guys. But Justin Close has been great in goal for us. We kind of a microcosm. I won't dig into the weeds, but like, we started off the first month, our power play was 11%, and everyone was panicking, but I wasn't. I go, we're going to be fine. Now we're like 45 in the last 5 games, and we had the right players. It just needed a little time, and that's what we've been, kind of working through with our squad right now. Is guys picking up new roles, finding their confidence, and we were banged up early, and injuries are part of sports, but I had not gone through anything like that, and what it puts you back, it sets you back. I mean, there was 1 week we only had 1 goalie in practice. There was another week we only had 6 defensemen in practice. You can't do a lot of the drills you normally do, especially early in a year. But we're through that. Knock on wood, we're through that. And coincidentally, with all that, we're starting to play much better hockey.
Coach, I got to ask you about Jimmy Snuggerud. I know there are a lot of St. Louis Blues fans that pay attention to this show. Where is he at, and how excited are you to be his coach?
Well, he's a terrific player, and he had a great magical year. That line, Cooley, Nyes, Snuggerud, was one of the more impactful lines maybe that's played in college hockey, and they're not here. So we've been juggling a lot of times trying to find the right chemistry, but that's what normally you do. Last year was just a magical year when it all comes together, the plans. But we're making progress. I have never had a player, that shoots a puck like Jimmy, and the closest is Thomas Vanek that I had. But the way Jimmy can shoot a puck and his release, his ability to score is something I haven't been around. It's just at another level. And we're in, like that one of our players said, he's in a slump. Well, he's got 9 goals, and he's like, what slump? He just doesn't have 19. What do you want?
He's not a slump.
Coach can speak to this, Jimmy. I don't think people realize how hard it is to score goals in college hockey. I'll give you a case in point. Brady Tkachuk was playing at Boston University. He had 8 goals his freshman year, his draft year. He went 4th overall. His draft year, he had 8 goals. The next year in the NHL, he had over 20. I mean, people don't understand, and Coach Motzko can speak to this as a former player and as a coach. And he's coached some really good players at St. Cloud State, and he coached some really good players in Minnesota, obviously. Coach, it's not easy to score in college hockey.
No, it's not. And we're getting our players at that age, 18, 19, 20 when they're coming in to us, and all their body types are different. But by 22, by 23, they're all catching up. They've all been in the weight room. The whiskers are on now. And sometimes that's what you're waiting for, is you're waiting for that maturity to land in these players. And Jimmy, he's doing great right now. And it's just not, he's not scoring at the level he did a year ago. But I was watching the Wild play the other night, the Minnesota Wild. They had the camera on Matt Boldy, and he had 4 goals in 4 games. They said he's smiling, and before that he had 1 in 13 games. Life's what athlete doesn't go through a quiet time, and whether you're at the plate or batting and or a hockey player scoring goals, you all go through it. But like we said with Jimmy Snuggerud, if 9 goals is a slump, I don't feel bad. He's going to find his way to big numbers for sure.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I think St. Louis got a heck of a player there. And Coach, I don't want to break your spirit, but I'd be surprised if you had him after this year. But that's okay. You can hit me later on after that. But Jimmy, this is important for the coach. This is a huge high school hockey weekend in the state of Minnesota. I know he's in Ohio right now, and I'm sure they're out scouting and evaluating. I talked to a lot of NHL people, Bob, and they're out in Minnesota this weekend watching and evaluating. They say Minnetonka is loaded up to the gills. What's it like to be the head coach of the University of Minnesota Golden Gophers in the state of hockey?
Well, we're awful fortunate. I know there was just a stat the other day is Minnesota right now is number 2 in NHL players behind Ontario.
Wow.
And we got an unbelievable great youth system. It starts there. I know a lot of accolades go to high school, but it's got to back up before that. We're still, and we can't lose that, which I think happened a little bit in the East, is your community-based youth hockey associations where the numbers are strong. And we're still very solid in that area. And that's the thing that has to stay with the state of Minnesota. When you turn to pay for play, you lose a lot of numbers. And we've got the numbers. We got the rinks. We've got, and the other thing we've got going now is back in the day, and I'm going to go, and not that long ago, a lot of the coaches in youth hockey were like dads that were all baseball players, and now their kids want to play hockey. Well, now, across the United States, you have so many former players that are giving back to the sport and coaching, and it's at all levels. And with raising my 2 boys that came through it, I got to see that with, just some outstanding coaches, young coaches who are giving back to the game and who played college hockey, who had played junior hockey, college hockey. And I think we're all USA Hockey's benefiting from that. That's one of the great growths we've got in our country is how the number of players and the talent that we're developing all over our country, but they're getting good coaching, and USA Hockey's got a lot to be proud of from that area.
Do you have any good Herb Brooks stories that you can share?
No, I get asked. He was so intense and so serious, and I was so fortunate I got to be around him for most of the season at St. Cloud State. The one is, it was 1987, so it's 7 years removed from 1980. He'd been coaching the New York Rangers. I was at St. Cloud State, and there was rumors that Herb Brooks was going to get the job. And I used to tell the story. It's not that, who decided at St. Cloud State, let's call Herb Brooks and see if he wants his job. Well, it was Bill Radovich was the guy, and vice president of Hibbing, who's an Iron Ranger, passionate person in hockey, makes the call. Well, Herb takes the call and says, let me think about this. And he, lo and behold, he takes the job. And the reason for it was, at that time, Minnesota only had 2 Division I programs. We have 6 now. And he was fighting for the state of Minnesota, and he was only there 1 year. And it was a 5-year plan to move St. Cloud to Division I, and he made it happen in 1 season. Then they built the National Hockey Center shortly after. Craig Dahl got the job, and the rest is history. And it's been and I was so fortunate that I've coached 2 college programs, the same 2 that he coached, St. Cloud State and the University of Minnesota. So it was just, he came to campus, and I do remember the first meeting. Normally, we'd get 35, 40 guys try out for the at that time we were Division III, and there must have been 90 guys in the room, and you couldn't have heard a pin drop. and in walks, Herb Brooks, and he was on a mission with that program, and then he went from there to the Minnesota North Stars.
Yep.
Coach, I want to go back to the World Junior talk there too, because I cover the Boston Bruins. So I'm around Charlie McAvoy a lot. And, we were talking before how much he credits that moment, winning that gold and that game, is for his ability to embrace big moments and play under pressure. So if you go back, what struck you the most about your time with him and that experience coaching him?
Well, he and Luke Cunnin were I think two of the real leaders of the program. And when I say a players tournament, players are going to have to perform at a high level. And he got one of the critical goals and set up Bellows on one. I can remember. I don't remember a lot of things from the past. And then Fox is the one that set up that goal. Great pass down to the goal line to Colin White. But he put the team on his shoulders with the minutes he had to log. People forget that the gold medal game, Lindgren couldn't play.
That's right.
He was sick as a dog back in the hotel, and that was a monster loss for us because he was a heart and soul defenseman, 8 minutes and one of our top penalty killers, and you lose him, and that doubled Charlie's minutes that night, and other guys stepped up. So, there wasn't a moment that was too big for him, and he relished the leadership role that he and Luke took on, and it was just fantastic to be around those guys.
That's great. Yeah, you can see it now, the way he plays and the way he embraces it now. Pierre?
Real quick, one of my favorite stories was the next year in Buffalo, the outdoor game with Brady Tkachuk, and I just loved him. And
hard not to.
Yeah. He is unbelievable, and with the heart and the toughness he has. But we're in it's in a shootout again with Canada in the outdoor game, and at that time you kind of look down your bench. He's got 1 foot over the boards, and just you're picking me. Like there are some players that they look straight ahead and they hope you don't call their name, and he had 1 foot over the boards, scored the goal. Did the great celebration, to the whole Canadian side, only like he could do. It was that's one of those moments I just thought was fantastic. Like, go ahead, Brady, you're in. Go take it.
Jimmy, I got to ask the coach this one final one, and then we'll let him go because I know it's a game day. Coach, one of my good friends in the coaching business is Bill Greer, and you probably remember him from the Austin Mavericks.
Yeah.
I think you do. And Jimmy, I have to tell you this. This is a story from Coach Greer yesterday. I called him because we're good friends, and I knew that he had the chance to potentially coach Coach Motzko. He never did. He actually cut him. And this is a great story from Bill Greer. And Coach, I'm not saying this to embarrass you. I'm saying it to praise you. Bill Greer told me after he cut him, he thought it was the end of the world for him as a coach because he ended up seeing how well Bob had played later on. And Bill said to me probably 15 or 20, maybe more than that, 25 years later, he saw Coach Motzko at an event. I think there's a coaches convention. And he thought you were going to punch him. And you actually came up to him and said, I want to thank you because that actually helped me have perspective on what I needed to do to be better. Is that true?
I started, that was the Austin Mavericks in the USHL. It was my hometown.
Yeah.
And, kind of true, but I asked to get traded. I didn't see myself fitting in, and probably he didn't either. So so I got traded to the Waterloo Blackhawks to play for Jack Barzee.
Yep.
And it was, and then the next summer, so I played that first year against Austin, and we made it to the national tournament. And then the next summer, we went to Dubuque. Our team got sold. So all the players, Stick Sharpener, we went from Waterloo to Dubuque for the Fighting Saints. And we won the Clark Cup, Anderson Cup, and the national tournament.
Wow.
But that summer, going to that second year, Austin made a trade offer to get me back. And Barzee called me and said, they want you back. Do you want to go? I said, no. And Barzee said, well, I'm getting a really good deal. It's better than keeping you. And I said, no, I'm not going. I'm going to stay. So It's just how life works. And you just take the opportunities that jump in front of you and you run with it. And I ended up having a wonderful experience in the USHL playing for Jack.
Yeah. So wait, you guys, go ahead, Pierre.
No, go ahead.
So you guys had like no trade clauses back then, or no?
No, there was. So you usually put bag and stick and money if you could get the players back then.
But I can tell you one thing: you made a lasting impression on Coach Greer, just the way you handled that, and years later talking about it. And I think it speaks a lot to the character, Bob, that you've had throughout your entire career, and the difference you've made for so many young people that have had to go through a lot of different battles. And I think that speaks a lot about your quality as a coach. And I can't thank you enough for joining us. It means a lot. Thank you.
Awesome to be with you guys. All right.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Coach. We appreciate it. Coach Bob Motzko joining us here on the eye tests. And Pierre, that was fun. That was a lot of fun, as all these on-campus interviews are every Friday. And we want to remind everybody too, hit the like button down there and hit subscribe. We appreciate it. And for you college hockey fans, if you're watching this right now, there's going to be one of these every Friday going forward, just as we already have since we started. So join us here every Friday for On Campus. Pierre, great interview as always. With
Jimmy, you know what's amazing though, just for the fans out there, we're talking to Greg Brown, and he's got all these high profile former or future NHL players, I should say. We're talking to, Greg Carville at UMass. We're talking to all these coaches. We just had Bob Motzko on.
Pandolfo.
All these coaches. Jay Pandolfo. We have all these coaches coming on that have all these future NHL players. And it's amazing. So we just heard the insight on Jimmy Snuggerud. I think Jimmy Snuggerud is going to be a 30 to 40 goal scorer in the NHL. I really do, with the St. Louis Blues. He shoots the puck that well. But to hear it from his coach that works with him every day, that's the kind of stuff you want to hear. Remember what Jay Pandolfo said about Macklin Celebrini. I mean, he takes his game to another level. His work habits are insane. You hear Greg Brown talk about Ryan Leonard or about Will Smith or about Cutter Gauthier. It's pretty amazing. So that's one of the things I like about, and it was your idea to do the on-campus Fridays, because I think it gives the viewers and the fans out there an opportunity to hear just where some of these kids are.
Yeah. And what they're coming from. And two things I didn't get a chance to ask him, but I'll ask you just because you're a coach and you're so familiar with college hockey. He was talking about, he said, yeah, it's tough. You lose these guys to the pros all the time, but that's the way it goes. It's in with the old, in with the new, out with the old. And I see it with the Bruins. And we've spoken about this, about establishing cultures on pro teams and NHL teams. Right. And I don't know, for some reason, and correct me if I'm wrong, it just seems like it'd be a lot harder to do that at the college level, because you're not with these players nearly as long as you're with some of the players that are establishing that culture on the pro team. So how do they maintain that symmetry going forward when they've got, kids leaving after their freshman year, kids leaving after their sophomore year? How do they maintain that culture that he's established? Obviously, he does his job. But in terms of the players buying in so fast and so often, how does that happen?
The great Jerry York, the Hall of Fame coach from Clarkson, Bowling Green, and Boston College. He's probably best remembered for his time at Boston College with all the national championships. I remember he asked me to come and speak to his team. I want to say it was like 7 years ago. So I went up there. Johnny Gaudreau was on the team. Chris Kreider was on the team, just to give you a perspective of the players that were there. And after I spoke, I remember going into his office with Mike Cavanaugh and Greg Brown. Those were his two assistants at the time. Now it's funny. Brown's the coach at BC and Cavanaugh's the coach at UConn, and they've both done fantastically well. And I said, Coach, what's the key to your recruiting process? And he said, I'd much rather have a great person who's a good player than a great player who's a marginal person. So I said, why is that? And he goes, because the great person who's a good player will listen to me and be coachable. The great person, or the great player who's a marginal person, not going to listen to me. Yeah. He's going to be on his own program. So I think it comes down to the type of people you recruit. And I think it comes down to the character issue. And that's where the eye test really does matter. It matters a lot. And you look at the programs that have been consistently good year after year after year. Usually they have high caliber character people that are coming in year after year after year.
And then the other one I want to ask you too was you guys were talking about how hard it is to score in college hockey.
Yeah.
Is that because these kids are being taught systems so early in their hockey careers, whether, it's as a 15, 16, 17-year-old, that they're learning more about how to fit their style and their game into a system maybe than ever before?
I think that's really well said. And I would agree with that, Jimmy, a lot. The other thing too is there are not a lot of elite game breakers in college because everybody's about the same. You heard Coach talk about, the age gap. And as they get to be 20 or 21, they start to get more mature and they start to get stronger and quicker. And that's where the separation point happens. And he's right about that. But I would say this is that most college players are pretty equal. Some are now, not everybody's Paul Kariya. Not everybody's Jack Eichel. Not everybody's Brady Tkachuk. I'm just throwing out, limited examples. And those guys go on to be unbelievably prominent players. I can't even imagine, Brady chose to go play at BU. If Matthew had ever gone to college rather than go to the London Knights, I can't imagine what he would have done in a year or two of college hockey. You think about it. I mean, seriously, I remember watching his father, Keith, play on a line with Tony Amonte and Sean McEachran at Boston University. McEachran, I was in Pittsburgh then. McEachran was part of our property in Pittsburgh. And I remember watching that line saying, man, these guys are really good. And then you go up to BC and you watch the Hemline and you watch Hines, Emma, and McGinnis, and you're going, oh my gosh, these guys are really good. So, college hockey is really hard to score because I think the balance level is pretty similar around college hockey.
Nice too. And what's been your key? I mean, so you go back to those days, right? It was rare when you had so many first rounders coming out of college hockey in those days, right?
Right.
What's been key over the last 10 to 15 years or so for you for seeing more NCAA players get drafted so high?
I think there's less bias. There used to be, I think, a little bit more bias, and that's not a knock on Canadian Major Junior at all, which is an amazing developer of talent, by the way. And also you've got Europeans playing college hockey that never used to play before, and I think that makes a difference. The borders have opened up. The Iron Curtain doesn't exist. And could you imagine if Jaromir Jagr would have played college hockey? Yeah, no. But anyway, that's another story for another day.
Yeah.
Or Pavel Bure or Alexander McGillney. I mean, you can go down the line. You look at the players; it's just crazy. But yeah, no. I think more than anything, I think the bias. There's less bias now than there used to be, and I think that's a good thing for hockey. I really do.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, I enjoyed that as always, Pierre, and I'm looking forward to our next college coach. And eventually, we'll get.
I have a sneaking suspicion who the next one will be. It'll be out west as well.
Okay.
Of a very prominent program. I just have to be able to link up with them. How's that for modern technology?
Perfect.
Find a way to link up.
Well, I was happy too that we gave the Minnesota hockey fans quite the week too. I mean, we had Billy Guerin, and then we had Bob Motzko. So
and Jimmy,
I was state of hockey week here.
The state of hockey is booming right now, and for those that aren't familiar, Minnetonka is a very strong high school program, very strong youth program. And I can tell you right now, I've got friends that are obviously scouts in the NHL, and there is just a constant stream of people flooding into the state of Minnesota early on anyways, this high school season, because they say this has been maybe one of the bigger bumper crops of talent they've seen in Minnesota in a very long time. And it goes back to what you and I talked about the other day. If you're going to scout for a living, you can never discount the 3 M's. Massachusetts, Michigan, and Minnesota, and everything else follows in place. But usually if you hit the 3 M's really hard, you're going to find players.
One more question. Sorry. I just want to say, in the past, I'd say 7 to 10 years, there's been a couple different states that are starting to really, states you didn't think of. And one of them that comes to mind, Pierre, and maybe I'm wrong. It just seems like it is New Jersey.
Jersey is
that become more of a hockey bed?
No, I think that's a great point, and absolutely. You heard Coach Motzko talk about it too, how players are giving back to the game. So I know Bruce Driver and Randy Velishek, former New Jersey Devil players, Johnny McClain when he was living in New Jersey. They gave back. They worked in the youth programs there, and that really helps. And then you look at Long Island, Pat LaFontaine and Dougie Waite. Those guys really gave back to Long Island. I'm telling you, John Tonelli in Westchester County, I know he gave back a lot. John Tonelli did, and so I look at a lot of these places where players, former NHL players, and a lot of college players give back to their communities, and it really works well in terms of development. But you're spot on with New Jersey. You're spot on.
Yeah. And even the Sun Belt states, right? Pierre? I mean, because they've had teams long enough in the NHL now that those alumni from those teams apparently probably going back there too.
Well, they are. And what's interesting, especially in the southern part of the United States, let's just use Florida as an example.
Yeah.
They've got 2 NHL teams. They've got East Coast League teams. And they've got a lot of former NHL people that like living there because there are no taxes and no snow to shovel. So what do they do when they're bored, tired of playing golf? They go to the rink and they help kids. And there have been some really, really good programs in Florida, both on the West Coast, the East Coast, and even the central part of the state that are being developed. And I can just to build off this, how about Arizona?
Yeah, that's where I wanted to go.
Okay, so Shane Doan, obviously the Arizona Coyotes moving from Winnipeg to there. So that's on Commissioner Bettman. He deserves a pat on the back for that. But you look at what Shane Doan gave back, and his son's playing for Arizona's farm team right now in Tucson. So I can show you so many different examples of kids. Matthew Nyes is from Scottsdale, Arizona. He's playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Austin Matthews is from Scottsdale, Arizona. He plays for the Toronto Maple Leafs. If 20 years ago, if I would have told you that, would you have believed me?
No, not at all.
No chance.
And I think, Pierre, this is what we're talking about here too. And look, I've been just as frustrated as any hockey fan or reporter with what's gone on with Arizona, with them trying to find an arena. It's gotten old. We're not going to lie, but at the same time, this is why they're fighting so hard though for it, right? Is because they have established grassroots programs there and they don't want to lose that. And I don't blame them. Like, I do hope they find something there. I would love to see, don't get me wrong, I want to see a team in Quebec City again sometime. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but I get it. Like, people tend to forget what we're talking about here and what it really was all about when he put a team there. They have, maybe they're not succeeding at the NHL level. Well, they are now. We'll get into that another time, but they have succeeded at the grassroots level. And I imagine, they're scared that if they move that team, does that start to fade away again? So I think people need to keep that in perspective when they bash Bettman's, quest to keep the team there.
Spot on. I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't. And part of why hockey in Vegas has boomed, enlightened ownership, tremendous arena, great passion for the game, transplanted fans and new fans that come into the game. And so I think actually what's gone on in the southwest part of the United States has been phenomenal. Hopefully they'll get a team in Houston, Texas at some point. That would be awesome for hockey. I really believe that. But to me, the biggest thing is when I look at Arizona in particular, Arizona State, I truly believe this, Jimmy. And we just had Bob Motzko on, and I mean no disrespect to the Big Ten. I mean no disrespect to the NCHC. Nothing against the ECAC, nothing against Hockey East. But I tell you right now, if they get going in terms of recruiting kids from Western Canada and the western part of the United States, Arizona State, they're going to be in the upper echelon of NCAA hockey. They really are. I've been to games there. I've watched my son play games there at the Mullet Arena, and it is a beautiful arena. It's beautiful, Jimmy.
Yeah,
it's magnificent. It really is. And to be a college venue right on a college campus is amazing. Now, can it support an NHL team long term? No, it can't. It doesn't have the seating capacity. But for a short term, it can really help. And I think it is helping, actually. I really do.
It's interesting, too. You mentioned Vegas there. I remember when Bruce Cassidy came back last year, his first time back in Boston. I think it was around November at that time. And, one of the things, we were just talking when the mics were off, whatever, how's everything out there? And he said, Jimmy, I'm surprised. Like the youth hockey around here is pretty good. Like I'm pretty impressed, because he's got a kid who plays and his kid also plays baseball. And he's like, it's not anything I ever imagined. It's much, much better.
I remember going out there early on Doc Emmerich and I were staying downtown in Las Vegas, and we had to go out to the practice rink. It's a pretty
In
funny
Henderson,
story.
eh?
Yes.
Yep.
And we go up to the practice rink, and there are all these people standing around outside. So I jokingly say to Doc in the car, I said, "They're here waiting for you." And I just thought it was people outside the rink. They were actually waiting in line
to get
to
in.
go in to
Yeah.
watch a morning skate.
Yeah.
I am not kidding you.
Yeah. It's
So then
insane.
Doc and I go in the back, and all of a sudden we're sitting upstairs and talking to George McPhee, who couldn't be a nicer person, and Kelly McCrimmon, couldn't be nicer guys. And we're sitting in the rink, Doc and I, and we're watching practice. Holy moly, there's like 3,500 people here watching the morning skate. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And they get that almost every day. It's fantastic. It really is.
Yeah, that's one of he brought that up too. That was actually, I think, the first thing he said to us was just, you have no idea what practices are like.
No, I found it amazing. I mean, look, you're talking to a kid that grew up in Montreal, and the Montreal Canadiens were it. They won all the time. I mean, you knew you could count on missing school almost every spring because you go to the parade. But you were never allowed in to go watch practice. You couldn't get in the foreign door. It was like bolted like Fort Knox.
Scotty wasn't allowing that.
Scotty was really involved in all that. So was the late Sam Pollock. So yeah, they were all involved in it.
Yep. Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, listen, another great week here on the Eye Test, Pierre. I'm looking forward to next week. And thanks for setting that up with Bob Motzko on another great edition on campus here on the Eye Test. Remember, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We really appreciate it. We're having a ball here, and it's only going to get bigger from here. And we want to thank, obviously, our great production crew, Emilio and Sammy as well. So we will talk to you on Monday. This has been another edition of the Eye Test.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Eye Test with Pierre McGuire and Jimmy Murphy on YouTube, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.